Hey everybody, it is Friday afternoon. It is 4 o'clock here in the West Coast. That means it's 7 o'clock over there on the East Coast. It might be way late at night over there in Europe or wherever you are. It might even be Saturday. But wherever you are, you know what time it is. It is time for Cinema Crusaders, that show where we go back and we look at older movies that we think deserve a second look, and we hope that we are introducing you to them if you haven't seen them before, and you'll go back and check them out because they're worth having a look at. So this week we are going to be talking about a movie from 1979 starring Donald Sutherland and Sean Connery. It was written by Michael Crichton and directed by Michael Crichton, none other than The Great Train Robbery. I think it's a really fun film, and we got a lot to say about it. But before I get into that with all of you, I need to introduce my co-host for tonight. He is a writer for both Omen Comics and for Blitz. He writes Blitz for Revelation Comics. He's also a writer on Blood World. He is my good friend and an incredibly insightful analyst for comics, TV shows, movies, etc. I'm talking about none other, the man behind Eleutheria, the Dark Elf Paladin, Steve Shadewing Sellers. How you doing, Steve?
From the dawn of time we came. Every time I hear Sean Connery start a movie with narration, I keep thinking of the Highlander opener. But I will say Sean Connery definitely steals this movie, and if you're a fan of his, you will want to watch this movie. In terms of the overall thing, I had not realized until you told me that this was a Michael Crichton movie. He's been involved with a lot of stuff that I've liked, but 13th Warrior, Jurassic Park, things like that. But I never really realized like exactly how far his repertoire went back, and that he was actually involved in direction, which was kind of a shock to me. And on a film like this, which you generally don't expect to see a guy who is mainly known for like medical thrillers and weird science fiction type films to be involved in. But yeah, he did a heist film set in the Victorian age, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is. And before this, he had done movies like Coma or Westworld. For all of you who enjoyed the series that was on, I think it was on HBO. I could be wrong. He wrote and directed the original Westworld movie way back in the day with Yul Brynner.
Yeah.
So yeah, go check that out. And we may have to cover that at some point because I like that movie quite a bit myself. So Future World, it's okay as a sequel to Westworld, but I think Westworld is the superior film. So now I will explain to everybody our other two Crusaders. Lance is busy dealing with a number of issues this week, so he is out. And I believe Jeff has gotten incredibly busy doing some other things as well. So I'm hoping he might pop in. But if he doesn't, we hope and wish both of them well and can't wait till they can come back and be with us again. So with that, you have these two beautiful faces on the screen for your Cinema Crusaders this week. So let's talk a little bit about Westworld. And as I like to do, I usually like to get our opening thoughts on the film. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Steve, first for your opening thoughts on this movie, The Great Train Robbery. What were your opening thoughts? What were your thoughts going into it? And then after the film, what did you think about the movie overall?
This was one of those movies, The Great Train Robbery, where it was kind of on my radar, and it was one of those I would like to see eventually, but never quite got around to sort of movies. And a lot of it is just because, hey, it's, Sean Connery and Donald Sutherland. You're always going to get good performances out of those two. You definitely get them in this movie. But kind of going in, I really didn't have a whole lot, in terms of expectations. And then I came in, actually watching this, and I realized, yeah, this is actually a pretty solid heist movie. Very much the kind of precursor to things like Ocean's 11, well, the modern Ocean's 11, and those kinds of films. And it's done pretty well. And a lot of it is, done very smartly, like, the way they plan the heist, the way that they, deal with the steps in between, without drawing attention to themselves, all the things that come together. But also a lot of it is just because Pierce, the character that Connery plays, is so compelling. He is a total bastard, and I think this may be one of the actually like worst, most loathsome characters that Sean Connery has ever played, and yet You don't hate this guy because Sean Connery is so good at this at playing this character. He's so charismatic, and you just and he's audacious. And he's the kind of guy who really should be the villain of the piece. And because he's the main protagonist, you end up rooting for him in spite of the fact that this guy can do some pretty bad stuff in the film. So I was kind of impressed by that, and they never shied away from him being bad guy either.
Yeah, he's the gentleman thief, but with an even darker side than you expect. We're going to get into it, but there are a couple moments we were talking about before we came on the air where he does stuff, and we're just like, "Holy cramoly, where did this come from?" That took a dark turn, So it's pretty fantastic. Let's see. Mike Nunley saying you love to hate him. Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it's like you acknowledge that this guy, I mean, is a bad dude, but at the same time, he is so charming that you just don't care. He's all and on top of that, this is a guy who really, is bold, in not caring. Yeah, in his complete sociopathy. It's impressive.
Yeah, I will say that when this movie first came on my radar, and it was a number of years ago, I watched it initially because Donald Sutherland was in it. And Donald Sutherland has played a lot of my favorite characters, and one of my favorite characters of all time, which is Oddball from Kelly's Heroes, another movie I would love to cover at some point. So I watched this, and then Donald Sutherland's performance in this film goes in a completely different direction. He is a grown-up artful dodger from Oliver Twist. And he does I would say the weakest part of his performance is Donald Sutherland doing an English accent. But you know what? He gets away with it because he's Donald Sutherland, So, and as Steve was mentioning before we came on air, his mannerisms and stuff, we're going to get into that in more detail. But he does this great job. But the three main villains in this film are played by Donald Sutherland, Sean Connery, and then Leslie Ann Warren, who is a mostly TV actress from Britain. Very beautiful woman, very, very beautiful. And she is the femme fatale of the movie and does an incredible job. But the fact is that she's as loathsome as Pierce is, but Pierce even has a hold on her. So it's like Pierce is above all of them, and it is pretty fantastic. And the way Michael Crichton weaves this whole story together, and they even have setbacks where they have to, they had their plan and they thought they had everything going together, and then something goes wrong, and then they have to fix that. It's very believable right up until the end, and we're going to get into that as well. There, the end kind of falls short a little bit, but the rest of the movie is so good that you can forgive the little bits that they did at the end. So, that said, let's get into the actors and their characters real quick. And there's three that I definitely want to cover, and then anyone else that you want to cover, we can do that. So let's start with the big kahuna, right off the bat, Sean Connery playing Pierce. So for all of you out there, Pierce is, like I said, he's the gentleman thief. He's the mastermind in here. He is Moriarty for all intents and purposes in this film. He is so slick and so sly, though, and so charming that all of the various things he does, and I'm going to let Steve elaborate on that, you give him a pass on for most of them. Not only that, and we will probably mention this as we talk about the different characters, the society that Pierce is swindling is so corrupt and decadent in its own way that you really don't care that they're getting ripped off. And that's part of the charm of this film, is that no punches are pulled, and showing Victoria England with, lumps and all, warts and all. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk a little bit more about Donald Sutherland and Pierce, or not Donald Sutherland, Sean Connery and Pierce, and the performance that was given here and the character himself.
Okay. The thing with him is that a lot of it is just that he's always a step ahead of everybody, and it's very clear, like throughout the movie up until the very end. This is a guy that embodies the trope of the magnificent bastard, which is that guy who is always very sly, but he's also like the guy who thinks ahead, and he's also very good at adapting. Those kinds of characters, and you'll see a lot of them, throughout throughout fiction. And those I admit are like some of my favorites, which is probably one of the reason why I really ended up liking this character. That, and I really love Gentleman Thieves.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit of both of those. And yeah, I would say he is kind of a Moriarty. But the thing is, Moriarty is more like a math professor who, styles himself the Napoleon of crime and tries to disappear. This is a guy who likes to mix things up when it's necessary. He likes, kind of like thumbing his nose at the system and at the law just because he can. But he's also a guy who is extremely sociopathic. He will use anyone and anything to get his goals, and he doesn't care, where he leaves them. Has no problem leaving his girlfriend, to manage this guy who's a sexual predator, not just once but twice. He sticks Agar in a box with a dead cat. I mean, for a long period of time, he does not care even about the people on his own side. And when he's called to account for this at the very end, his only response is, "Well, I needed the money. I wanted the money." And it's just, but the way he says it is just so audacious and so charismatic that it's just like, wow. You just can't not like him because he's Sean Connery. He pulls the full James Bond on you with this character, and I think in a lot of ways, I mean, the fact that he was James Bond for so long, he's able to use those elements that he's cultivated over years and puts them into this villain, and he turns a character that you should on paper hate and makes him, this really fascinating, charming character that you want to follow, even while he's killing his own men.
Yes.
I'm absolute, I'm gobstruck, not just by like the level of charisma that, Connery brings to the role, but also how brazen and audacious this guy is. He will tell people to their face that, that he doesn't care at all about morality or anything else. He's just out for what he wants. And, when somebody asked him about the moral, the judge asked him about the moral implications of what he's doing, he's like, I don't understand the question. He damn well does, but he's just saying, I don't care. I don't care. He's a total sociopath. There is nothing redeemable about this guy, but he's so charming that it doesn't matter. And, it's Sean Connery playing, Sean Connery, doing what he does best and, inhabiting this role. And he takes this role that is really well written, and just elevates it. It's amazing.
Yeah, you're on board with them, and you really shouldn't be, but you're right along with them. And like you were mentioning, one of his compatriots that he breaks out of prison. I mean, they go and they do this whole thing to break the guy out of prison, and because they need him to be the acrobat, the snakesman for them. But then he gets caught after the job and turns coat on them. And Sean Connery doesn't bat an eye in having him killed. And we see it happen. And it's brutal.
He strangles the dude. He just strangles the dude from behind. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
I warned you not to turn nose on me.
Yeah. And
just leaves the guy there.
And at the end of the scene, you're thinking to yourself, well, Clean Willy kind of earned it, and you're like, wait a minute.
He wasn't so clean after that. No.
Yeah. So, and then there is another scene in the film with this character. He has his comedic moments as well. So, he is doing like a romance con on this rather non-attractive woman, the daughter of a bank president. And he's trying to woo her to get other things in that get information and stuff. And meanwhile, the mother, who's a complete cougar, is trying to hit on him. And he's talking about being to America, and she's, flirting with him.
She made up, by the way.
Yeah, in the middle of all this. And then he looks at her and he goes, America has many great erections. Maybe we should see those erections at some point. It's just like, you're laughing your ass off, So.
He's just flat out flirting with the mother, hard in front of the daughter. He has no shame. None.
And the husband as well. So, it's absolutely amazing. Mike asks, what criminal confessions can one be a gentleman version of besides a thief? I think assassin. Yeah. I mean, James Bond proves that. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
But I don't know. After that, I'd have to think about it. So, I don't even
Mhm.
know what other criminal professions are there besides thief and assassin. So, you know, I don't know. Um, Next, let's go to one of my favorites in the film, which is Agar, played by Donald Sutherland. Now, like I said, this character is really the grown-up artful dodger from Oliver Twist. Wait, we got something here. Yeah, Sin City had a gentleman assassin,
Yes,
definitely.
he did.
Yeah,
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 the cleaner.
yeah. So yeah, this is a grown-up artful dodger, but Donald Sutherland takes it to a Donald Sutherland place. I don't think that this character is the same if Donald Sutherland is not playing it, because his movements, uh, the way he moves his fingers, when he's getting ready to do his pickpocketing and stuff like that. The whistle he does, which reminds me of when he played Hawkeye in MASH, the original movie. I mean, everything about it is a happy-go-lucky thief slash pickpocket who is, I think he's got his own darker side, but I think it's because he's a little bit afraid of Pierce, and because Pierce is the mastermind who is going to make him rich, which is what Agar really cares about. Agar is a criminal through and through who is in it for the money, and so in that way, can we say he's a better person than Pierce? Technically, yes, but he's
That's
still a
not hard.
criminal.
That
Yeah.
is a low bar.
Yeah, it is a very low bar. Um, but he is lovable in his own way, and you love. He is one of those. He's a bulldog type character where he is nowhere near as skilled or smooth as Pierce, but he will work hard to get there and get to do his job no matter what. And so you're watching him at one point huffing and puffing his way, trying to figure out how to do this job in a certain amount of time as they're practicing. And he'll just keep doing it. He's exhausted. He's like, oh, just give me a sec. Just give me a sec. So it's absolutely amazing. Donald Sutherland is great in this role. What did you think about Donald Sutherland in this role, Steve?
He is basically Cameron to Pierce's Ferris Bueller.
Oh my God, that is a great comparison.
Yeah, he's this guy who, yeah, I mean, he's a thief and all of these things, and it's like, yeah, Pierce can't trust him. Well, Pierce doesn't trust anybody because that's how he rolls, But at the same time, it's like this is the guy who is basically a follower. He is somebody who tends to complain about things and look at ways that it can't be done, whereas Pierce is completely bold and brazen and just doesn't see any limits to anything. He can do everything. This is a guy who's always trying to talk himself out of things. And I think you have a very similar dynamic in that respect, where it's Pierce kind of like pushing him to do things he otherwise would not do. Yeah, partially it's out of the money, and partially I think he's very, very scared of Pierce. He should be. Pierce is a scary dude. We've seen what he does to people who cross him. Agar's not that stupid. I mean, that's kind of the thing. He's smart enough to know certain things, but he's not smart enough to play with the big dogs. So that
Yeah.
makes him a good operative for him, and he's very good with his hands. And I will say I love Donald Sutherland's physical acting. The way that he plays with the hands, and I'm almost reminded a little bit of Jack Sparrow and the way that Jack Sparrow does the ooh. Yeah,
Yes.
and I'm kind of wondering whether he studied this particular role, for Jack Sparrow, and if he did, that hats off to him for that, because that was a great influence to use.
Donald Sutherland always plays those slightly off kilter characters, especially early on. Later on he ended up playing much more serious people like the general from Outbreak and stuff like that. But early in
President Snow in the Hunger Games films, yeah.
yeah, but earlier in his career, he very much played those characters who were just a little bit touched, just a little bit crazy. So, and then it's funny because Kiefer Sutherland came along and he didn't really have that same kind of magic at all. Kiefer Sutherland's still very talented, but not in the same way that his father was, in my opinion. But let's see, Mike says, sounds like they make a great balance. They do.
Yeah,
They're a
they
great
do.
team.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I would say that, yeah, it's very much a Ferris Bueller group type of dynamic between all three of them when you kind of put it together.
It is really weird you say that, because then the third person that we bring in really kind of fits in, and I can't remember her name in Ferris Bueller, but the female character, Sloane, yeah. So Leslie Ann Warren's character Miriam in here is very much the Sloane of the group. It's amazing now that you pointed it out, and I can't believe I didn't see it before. And she is the femme fatale. She is the chameleon of the group. She could be anyone at any time. She could be a highborn lady. She could be a commoner. She could be a prostitute. Just any, and she is. And throughout the whole movie, she has many different roles. But the greatest part about this is that she is trying to tie down Pierce and get him to commit to her. And Pierce does not want that by any means, but she's wearing him down, you know? But at the same time, if you've read Oliver Twist or if you've watched Oliver, you have this feeling, you kind of worry a little bit for Miriam because you know what happened to Bill Sykes's girlfriend, you know? So, and you kind of wonder if that is on store for her or maybe they have the happy ending. I guess it depends on if you're a sick bastard like me or if you have some, you know, you're a glass half full person. So, what did you think of Miriam played by not Leslie Ann Warren? That's a completely different actress.
Leslie Ann Downs, I think.
Leslie Ann Down, yeah.
Yeah, I will say she is very, very good, and yeah, I would say absolutely she is the consummate actress. She was a professional actress when he met her, so he ended up recruiting her, and I was just like, yeah, you definitely can see, you know, that she's putting that in. She is the con artist. She is the distraction, you know, part of the heist. You know, it's kind of like how they always say that the best form of misdirection is a beautiful assistant. That's her. But at the same time, the wheels are always turning in her head, not as much as it does for Pierce. And I think her trying to land Pierce with any type of commitment is not going to work out. My feeling is like you. I think he's going to kill her.
Yeah,
because eventually he doesn't care about anybody. You know, she's going to outlive her usefulness to him, and he's going to ditch her because that's what he does with everybody. He's not going to change. He's a complete sociopath. So, you know, but she's, you know, at the same time, I think she is attracted to how dangerous he is. You know, she likes that this is a guy that spiced things up, and she likes that he's audacious and bold and all of these cool things. But it's like you're never gonna to hold down a guy like that for more than a few minutes. It's just not going to work out. I mean, how hard did she have to coax him into saying, oh, fine, I'll go to Paris with you after this whole thing is over. And it's like, and it's just like, I just don't believe you.
Yeah,
don't believe you at all. But you know, she's a very smart woman. She's very capable. You know, she handles these other men and you know and wrap them around her finger. And the one person she can't wrap around her finger is Pierce. So I think that's a large part of it of the attraction and the danger to it. It's that, you know, she wants the one thing she can't have, and it's kind of sad in a way, but it's also, well, you know, you kind of literally made your own bed there, so
yeah,
you know, lie at it.
And to be honest, it's kind of fun to watch at different times. The two of them have this give and take because she has a hard but playful edge to herself. So there's at one point where she is shaving Pierce with a straight razor, and he says something that she doesn't like, and she stops the straight razor right on his throat. She's like, "What were you saying?" You know, type thing. And then Pierce is kind of like trying to play it off cool, but at the same time, you can see he's sweating just a little bit, you know. And then there's another moment where Pierce is in bed and he's eating apples, and it's the same thing where she's trying to get the response she wants, and she's not above taking off her top, and it's classy, but it's obvious what she's doing. And messing with his masculinity until she gets the response she wants, you know. And Sean Connery plays it off perfectly. She goes, "And do you like this?" And Connery's like, you know, like that. So it is absolutely wonderful, the whole scene and the interaction between the two of them, and then the way that she plays off the different scenarios that Pierce puts her in, which are absolutely horrible. I mean, he's put his girlfriend in a brothel at one point, and then he foists her off on this guy who's, like we said, is a complete sexual deviant, you know, absolutely horrible. So are there any other main characters you wanted to talk, or characters in the film that you really wanted to talk about?
I think those are the main ones. I guess we can talk about Clean Willy a little bit, but I mean, I think he's not really that complicated. This is a guy who in the words of the Joker, is a squealer, and I know a squealer. Yeah. And which I find really amazing, because this is a guy who's very, very competent in what he knows how to do. I mean, he's a snakesman. He's a guy that, is very good at climbing places, escaping, infiltrating places without being seen. And then what ends up happening is that within a couple of days after he does the job for Pierce, he ends up getting caught by the cops because he was trying to steal something.
I think Clean Willy is one of those criminals with no common sense that you see sometimes. Like the guy who does all of the legwork to break into some place and steal something, and these are true stories where they go in and they rob a house and then there's nothing in there because they didn't do their work. And so they accept like a check from the guy, and then they get caught because they go to cash the check that they stole, or something. It's those kind of people where you're like, how stupid can you be? Well, they're good at being a criminal. They just don't have any common sense. So
yeah.
Let's see. What does Mike say here? Steve just quoted the Joker, call Guinness. Yeah, exactly. So
Heath Ledger's Joker in this particular case, I personally, I like Heath Ledger's Joker a lot, and secondly, I just feel like the point about him being a squealer just illustrates kind of like perfectly who Clean Willy is.
Yeah. Plus, Clean Willy, I mean, they break him out of prison to do the job in the first place, and the guy doesn't want to go back to prison, and it's obvious that he is one of those people that is doomed, if he hadn't gotten killed, to just be in and out of prison his entire life. It doesn't matter how good he is at what he does. He's a sad sack, a hard luck case.
He's just kind of dumb in some respects.
Yeah. So there is one more character that I wanted to talk about, and it is a character that is throughout the entire film. And I'm going to kick it over to Steve first, but I know there's a lot we wanted to say about it. And that character is Victorian England. Michael Crichton does a great job in the writing and then in the direction and look of the film of bringing a Victorian England to life, both from the high class all the way down to the lowest of the low, and not pulling any punches about the beauty of it. There's a lot of beauty in there, especially from the high class, but the seediness underneath it as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about that first, Steve. So,
yeah, I will say that they did a really good job at recreating Victorian London. I mean, not just visually, and although you do definitely kind of see the dark underbelly of it, and as well as like the classic cityscape, and everybody dressed up in the finery with the top hats and the canes and things like that. I mean, the trappings are all there, but just the language by itself, like he can definitely tell he was using the language of the time. He's a snakesman, or he's a screwsman. I mean, these are definitely like words that they would have used. I mainly know when you're talking about like the parlance of thieves. I mean, I keep thinking of Raffles, the amateur cracksman. These are not words people use nowadays. And yet the way that Crichton uses those words, it feels like a movie that ages well. A lot of times you use certain language and language of the time when you're writing stuff, and sometimes it doesn't hold up. This movie holds up. I mean, in the way that the story is told, and yet it feels like a period piece, and because it is. But there are no points like now where you kind of see these, where you have like really dumb humorous moments or cringy humorous moments that take you out of the time period. There's none of that there. You are immersed and you stay there, and it is really, really good.
The dialogue.
And also,
to your point, real quick, and then sorry to interrupt. The dialogue is done very well, and it's natural. So even though there's humorous elements, they're the kind of humorous elements that you have normally in your normal everyday life when you're talking. It's not out of place, and I think that is the kind of thing we're talking about in some movies nowadays where it's forced, and when it's forced, it's cringe. When it's natural, we can all identify with it and laugh at it. So sorry to interrupt. Keep going. So.
No, yeah, I think the main other thing I was going to say is that the understanding of Victorian England and seeing how it's portrayed, how the society is built, definitely gives you more reason to, if not support the criminals, then at least not really care a whole lot if the people get robbed, because these people are high society, like top tier banksters and things like this. This is war chests that they're using. The gold that they're stealing is money that was being used for the war in Crimea. All of these things are things that have a certain amount of relevance even today. I mean, you definitely could see that. But you also see the seedy underbelly and what's really kind of going on with this. And because of that, you just don't really care about these banksters. And then you find out who some of them actually are, like the one guy that Pierce
Trent.
leaves, Leslie and
or not Trent.
Peter, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll look at his
Peter,
name, but
Peter, yeah. That guy. When you find out, what a horrendous guy that dude is. It's just like, I don't really care if these guys get robbed. I'm not really necessarily saying that these people, deserve to be, robbed of their gold. Some of this money was going to go to soldiers out in the field and they're suddenly broke. That's not a good thing. But at the same time, it's like, you don't care about the banksters. These are people that it's like, if you hurt them, nobody cares. And I will also add also that the people that are representing the law and are ostensibly on the good guy side are some real buffoons. They are completely stupid in many ways. I mean, sometimes they do adjust their plans and they do make things a little bit more difficult, but they're not very smart. And not only are they not smart, they have this certain level of arrogance that comes with being on top. And, we have the perfect system, to avoid theft. Nobody would ever steal from us. And then it turns out, somebody stole from you. So,
I mean,
that's how it comes together.
Even though Pierce is a rogue and he's doing all of this for completely selfish reasons because he's a sociopath, you get the sense that there's also this element of many of these criminals wanting to throw a giant middle finger to the upper classes. The other thing I'll say is that, let's see, we got a comment real quick. Are the thieves not responsible for the consequences of their actions? Oh, they absolutely are.
Of course they are. No, we're not running away from that at all. It's just that Pierce doesn't care.
Yeah. Plus, it's one of those things where you have some, I'm not going to say empathy, but you empathize with them and you see their point of view from a certain point, from a certain point of, I'm going to go full Ben Kenobi here. From a certain point of view, you see what they're talking about. Doesn't mean that you've got to agree with that point of view, but you can see where they're coming from. Does it mean that we condone what they did? Absolutely not. It's like watching The Sopranos. You kind of get what they're doing in that life, but when you step back out of it, you're going, these people are complete lunatics. They all deserve to be in jail for the rest of their lives. So the other thing I'll say is that when they're showing all of this and the deep, dark underbelly and the seediness, I mean, this movie is not afraid to go there. Like I said, at one point we go into a Victorian brothel, with all of the deviants on display. They're not, this movie is not a porn movie. They're not getting into super levels of detail, but it's obvious what's going on, and there's all sorts of stuff going on.
They're betting on dogs to eat rats.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
catch
another
rats.
thing.
I'm like, and as a dog owner, I would never feed a rat to my dog. Never.
Yeah. And not only that,
terrible.
The dogs are getting, so what Steve is talking about is one of the bankers, they're trying to get into his home and figure out what his vices are, and they can't find anything. And Pierce correctly says, no gentleman is that clean, so he's like, and so he's saying, nobody has no vices, because the guy he sets his girlfriend to try and hit on him as a prostitute. He turns that down. He doesn't drink. He doesn't, gamble, as far as they can tell. Like, he doesn't do anything. So they're watching, and then they notice that he takes his dog out in his carriage at a certain time every night, and they're like, oh, he's a ratter. Well, not only are they feeding rats to the dog, what they're doing is they're putting the dogs in there with huge country rats, like 12, 15 at a time. So the dog is getting bitten by the rats and fighting the rats.
It's like the Victorian equivalent of Michael Vick.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely horrible. So the dog is getting hurt. The rats are getting killed, and it's pure sport, and people are betting on it, and the gentlemen are betting on it. And the guy, this banker, who isn't excited through the entire movie, he's bored throughout the entire movie. When he's watching his dog kill rats, he is the happiest he has ever been in his entire life, So that's just an example of what's going on in this society. It's pretty crazy. So to be fair, dogs are bred specifically for that purpose. Yeah, I mean it's just true. But in this case, I mean they're putting the dog
It comes
in a
across as animal abuse
yeah,
to
they're
me.
putting the dog in a pit, a literal pit with like
It is a
15
fighting
rats
pit.
for
It is
for
like
their
it is dog
lives.
fighting, except
Yeah,
with rats,
and
massive rats.
they show the dog in there like fighting the rats, like shaking the rats. I'm sure they were like fake, but nevertheless, I mean it's pretty. You get this sense as like I can't believe that they're doing this. It's cockfighting,
Yeah.
but worse. So yeah, it's they don't shy away from any of that, and there's some. It's pretty cool to see the way that Victorian London is built this way, and we see everything that's going on, and we get into the gentlemen's clubs and everything. So, for a movie that is not that long, I think it's a tad under 2 hours. Um, there's a heck of a lot of stuff packed into this film, that happens.
Mhm.
So that is really great. The story itself, the heist itself, Steve mentioned it a little bit. I'm going to go into a little bit, and then I want to kick it over to Steve. They are very smart in collecting their data. They're gathering their intelligence on what they need to do. So first, they figure out that the gold is shipped once a month on a train line, where it then goes onto a ship and it goes over to Europe, to Crimea, and then the soldiers are paid over there. And the gold is put into a special safe that requires 4 keys to open, and each of those keys is controlled by a different person. And so the task ahead of these criminals is to get their hands on the keys. Then obviously they've got to take an imprint of the key, because if they steal the key, then there's only 4 keys. The people will know that somebody's coming to steal. So they have to get their hands on the keys, take an imprint of the key, duplicate the key, verify that the keys work, then get themselves onto the train during the shipment, get the gold out, replace it so nobody knows the gold has been stolen, and then get the gold off the train and then make their getaway. That's a heck of a lot. And yet this movie manages to walk us through all of that and give us the seedy part of London and do this character stuff with the characters all in 2 hours. It's fantastic writing and filming. I want to kick it over to Steve. So, from the story perspective, did you think it was successful in all of that? We're going to talk about the ending after we do this part. But do you
Yeah.
think that the building up of the heist was successful, and then integrating the other elements as well? Is there anything that you really wanted to talk about, or did you not think it was successful? So,
I think it was generally successful, except for the ending that we're going to get into. But I think they present the problem. They kind of spend a lot of time, with the banksters and with the keys, and trying to establish what the obstacle is. They do a lot of things that you would expect out of an Ocean's 11 type of film, where each we find out where each key is, who has it, and then we see how the group goes in and cons each one of them, out of the keys, and those elements are all really really well done, and especially like, okay, we're going to find who these people's weaknesses, and we're going to exploit them, and we're going to exploit them in these different ways, and preferably in compromising ways so they don't report it. So all of it is just really really well thought out, and because my first thought when I was trying to watch it is, okay, how is it that you're going to get away with this without alerting everybody to the fact that you've been messing with their keys? So you have to not leave a trace at either of these sites, and it turns out, yeah, they have an answer for that. It is actually really really well thought out. Crichton's a good writer, and no question about that. And you definitely see this in this script. And the way that the actors kind of play with the material, I think, makes it even more convincing, especially when you're dealing with the cons, and how Downs will use come up with these identities and these fake accents, all of which are fairly convincing, as fake accents go. You have Agar going in, playing a lot of these other little roles, like, oh yes, I'm the one who is kind of like the usher in the establishment, and I'm going to take you to the madam.
yeah,
Just little roles like this, and then Pierce doing what he's doing, trying to pursue that young girl that he obviously doesn't care the slightest about, while the mother is trying to hit on him.
Yeah.
And so all of these different little situations that present like small chapters in a larger story, and the way that they get that set up works. And then once they get to the main event, you have a different set of situations. And I like that the banksters, even though they're dumb, they do end up learning from the stuff that they find, when it comes to their attention, that there's a plan going on, and there's and some involving Clean Willy. They go ahead and adjust to those plans. Oh yeah, we're going to put the lock on the carriage. We're going to do all these other things. So I will say that I appreciate that they do complicate things, and it's not too easy. Even though the characters are not very smart.
I just saw a beantail walk by over there. He's happy. He barked at whoever was going by. So I was going to mention that myself. So at one point, Clean Willy turns coat. He doesn't know enough about the plan to let them know exactly what's going on, which I thought was smart. So Pierce only gave him as much information as they needed. But the cops and the bankers are smart enough to figure out, okay, we might have a problem here. And then they have to amend their plan. So Pierce has to amend the plan. And that's when they put Donald Sutherland's poor character in a coffin with a dead cat and make it look like he has cholera, so they can smuggle him onto the, it's great to watch. It's really
I will
good.
say one point that I really loved around that point is that, okay, Donald Sutherland's character is just, ranting on and on about how we can't do this. We can't do this. Look at what they've added. We're never going to figure things out. And, Pierce is just sitting there thinking the entire time. And he says absolutely nothing while his brain is racing through an answer. And by the end of the scene, his whole response is, can we get a hold of a dead cat? That's it. Exactly. That's all he says. It's great.
Mike says, I don't think Bean agrees. I think Bean is excited. He's on the lookout for the coppers. So over there to the crusher. So
yeah. He wants to catch Sean Connery.
Yeah. So let's talk about the ending. And I'll introduce this and I'll kick it over to you, Steve. So the ending falls. Well, I'm not going to say it's falls flat. It rings a little bit hollow compared to the rest of the film, because Sean Connery has been so smart through all of this. Well, at one point, Sean Connery has to go over the train, and I do want to get into the stunts as soon as we're done here. But he goes on top of the train to get back to the last car where the gold is being held to help out Agar. And he loses his coat. And not only that, he's being covered with soot and everything and smoke. So right there, you would have think that a guy who's such a meticulous planner would have anticipated these types of things, but he doesn't. And then he has to get back into this car, his carriage, what's the word I'm looking for? Where he's sitting on the train. Yeah, his cabin in the train, and then leave via the train station. Well, now he doesn't have a coat, and he's all dirty, and his clothes are all dirty. So he takes the clothes off of of Agar, that smell, and he had been in the coffin and everything. And of course, they're too small and everything. So he rips the coat, and he ends up getting caught because he's got soot on his face and he's got a ripped coat. Right there, that doesn't really ring true either, because why did they arrest him? I guess because he looked suspicious, maybe. So, but you ask yourself, why didn't he just leave? Why didn't he just take off into the woods or something at some point? So that's one thing. Yeah. And then he's put on trial, and he has some very charming moments in the trial, and kind of sticks it to the judge and makes people laugh. And he's kind of the hero of the small folk. And then, of course, his companions have set up an escape for him, and he punches two people out. And Agar's driving the carriage, with the bars and everything that was supposed to take him away to jail after he's convicted, and they ride off into the sunset. And you're kind of like, really? There are only two police officers there, So the guy who just robbed, I think the modern equivalent is like $300 million worth of gold or something, just some insane amount. I'm like, I don't know about that. So it rang a little hollow for me. What did you think, Steve? What were your thoughts on the ending? So
I had similar issues for a lot of reasons. It's clear they were trying to set up this Jack Sparrow type of ending, where it's like, this is the day that you almost caught Jack Sparrow, and it's just like it works for Jack Sparrow. I don't think it works for a what is up to this point was a fairly reasonable biopic.
Yeah,
It was based on a true story, and it wasn't like exaggerated too much. And then they completely go over the top with the ending, and I just feel like no, no. If it was Jack Sparrow, I would have bought it. I think for Pierce, even if he is a bit of an over the top character, I didn't buy it, and I also didn't buy him getting arrested. They had no reason to suspect that he had done anything. They had no reason to suspect the gold was stolen. They had no reason to suspect that any crime at all was committed. I mean, on suspicion of what? You had nothing. There's certainly nothing that you can put him on trial for, and he's certainly not going to be stupid enough to admit that he did anything wrong.
yeah,
So that makes absolutely no sense to me. And it's like, okay, they found him because he was wearing Donald Sutherland's jacket and the back was ripped. No, that's not convincing at all. Especially since by that point they had not realized that they had switched the gold with lead.
no.
Had they realized it afterwards, I could have seen, okay, maybe some suspicion would be warranted, but at that point they're not even aware that a crime had taken place. So yeah, that makes absolutely no sense. And
And
then yeah,
and
it's just
and
stupid. And yeah, he should have been prepared. Normally he would be.
yeah, and the carriage was still locked, and everything was perfectly normal, like you pointed out, which is a great point. I almost get the impression, and I'm curious what you think of this, that like other movies we've seen, that the studio heads interfered here and wanted the Hollywood ending for the film. I mean, that's what it felt like to me.
That's certainly plausible. I could definitely see that having happened because, I mean, Crichton is not that bad of a writer. I mean,
Yeah,
he's a very very smart writer, and and most of the film, feels like a Crichton thing. This feels like something that maybe like another writer like Ghost wrote, another draft that was written by somebody else and was uncredited and tacked onto the ending.
yeah,
That's certainly plausible.
yeah. It just doesn't feel like the rest of the film. It really doesn't. So I absolutely agree with you. So the last part that I wanted to get in before we kind of wrap this up is I wanted to talk about the stunt work, and I'm going to talk about the stunt work specifically for the ending of the film in relation to some other movies as well. Um, this is back in a time when they were we kind of talked about this when we talked about Mad Max Fury Road, because they went other places where they could do dangerous stunts. Same thing here. This was a time when they still allowed people to do stunts on top of moving trains, and they stopped that for good reason. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But while I say that, being actually on location on top of a moving train and seeing a stuntman doing that work was pretty darn fantastic. So I wanted to ask you what you thought of that whole sequence with the train, and then I'm going to get into what happened during the filming of this movie and then some other movies as well. But first, let's talk about the scene itself, because that's the main stunt work. There's some other smaller stuff other places, specifically with Clean Willy. There's some great, stunts with that. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, I think it was generally pretty solid. I will say, in addition, I kind of feel like there was some model work that was done. You actually had some model trains running around in addition to the live action stuff. I thought the model work was quite good. Because you can definitely tell that not all of this stuff was actually done like straight live. But the way they made it look was seamless. There are some movies where you can kind of tell, yeah, that's a model. I want to say Logan's Run had a little bit of that. But this particular movie, it's actually very, very well done with that. So that's really good, and it helps sell, I think, the action sequence to a particular extent. And but mainly the main thing that you kind of see is Sean Connery, or at least Pierce's character, trying to make his way all the way across the moving train, and you can tell it's not Sean Connery. I kind of feel like by this point in his career, he is just like, yeah, I'm a little bit too old for the James Bond work, going through moving trains. And but at the same time, whoever is doing the stunt work for Connery, looks enough like him to really kind of sell it. How was it compared to Skyfall's top of the train fight? Well, I mean, considering it's, I don't think you can really compare those two fairly, because these were done like 3 decades apart at the
Yeah,
very least. So the stuff with the Great Train Robbery, you can definitely tell that the camera is farther out Whereas in Skyfall, you can definitely make out the actual people that are involved a lot more. They've definitely had by that point refined the camera work, refined the stunt work a lot more, so that you could definitely tell that there were real actors kind of involved with that and who they were, or at least enough to kind of fake it. But I think you kind of needed the Great Train Robbery to make a film like Skyfall possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's on a the cameras here. The pullback shots are on a helicopter. They also did some close-up shots of Sean Connery actually on top of the train, but he wasn't moving or anything. They were just like filming him so they could get some shots of his face. That said, a couple things. So train shots are very dicey. They do them rarely in Hollywood these days because a couple people actually died doing them. And some people have gotten hurt. Jackie Chan famously in Rumble in the Bronx hit something while the train was going full speed as he was dangling off the side of the train. Spent several months in hospital. Someone else died hitting a stanchion while holding onto a train in another movie. I think it was the movie Buster. So that movie. And then in this movie, the shots where they did the close-up of Sean Connery, do you remember the shot where suddenly he ducks down because he sees the bridge coming?
Right.
That is real. That is ad-libbed because they didn't know, they hadn't planned, they didn't know that bridge was coming there. And the cameraman pointed to it and Sean Connery ducked down. And if he hadn't ducked down in time, Sean Connery would have died. So, yeah. It's very interesting.
The surprise actually looks real on screen, and I think that was his genuine reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they had to duck down and go underneath the bridge while on this train, and there wasn't a whole lot of clearance and everything. So it is one of those genuine reactions, and it looks great on film until you realize that someone almost died there, and the safety procedures and everything they did since then for trains have gotten a lot better, and they don't do a whole lot of what they would call in the business, I think they call them train hangs or side hangs, cliff hangs, where you're traveling along on a train and you're going past objects close to you while you're hanging off the side of the train. And the reason they don't do that is because of, those deaths, or they are very, very careful about it. I think there might be a scene in the first Mission Impossible where something like that happens as well. But a lot of that was composited in, I think, as well. So.
And also Tom Cruise is insane and does all kinds of ridiculous stunts anyway. So
yes,
he's kind of an outlier.
And we'll point you towards Tom Cruise actually doing some insane base jump in the latest Mission Impossible movie. So I think he actually did that thing with the motorcycle and then jumps off, and dude is living his best life. More power to him, I guess. So the fact
that he can do that at 60 some is pretty impressive.
Yeah. It's like that guy is insane, but he makes great movies. So I'm not going to argue with it. So this was great. Let's tie up the film. So we've talked about all of the stuff we've seen. Would you recommend this movie to people, Steve? Would you think this is worth watching?
Yeah, I definitely would. I mean, especially if you're like a fan of Sean Connery in general. If you're a fan of Sean Connery in general, you should watch this movie because it takes the James Bond sort of archetype and that performance, and it twists it in a way that you haven't seen before, probably. And I think that it really kind of adds up. As a heist film, I think it ranks up very highly. I think it compares very well to things like Ocean's 11. It's one of those where you kind of have defined roles for each character. They go through the motions. It has a lot of the psychological elements. It has a lot of thrills going on, and you get and just these villains, these people that are the train robbers themselves are such interesting characters played by actors at the top of their game. And yeah, it's absolutely worth it. And plus, it's like, if you're a fan of Michael Crichton, you should definitely see this movie because it is well written. You see Crichton doing things that are not, you would not normally expect of him being in his wheelhouse. And yet he pulls it off near flawlessly, except for the ending. Yeah, absolutely. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Crichton is a gem. I mean, the guy has written so many different things, and until you start to actually think about what he's written, I mean, he did Westworld, he did Coma, he did this, he did Jurassic Park, he wrote those, he wrote Timeline, those books, he wrote Congo, you know.
13th
So
Warrior.
yeah, 13th Warrior. I mean, the guy is an incredible writer who can write a number of different genres, and can obviously write not only novels but can write for screen as well. I will say that the other thing that struck me about this film, and please, add in anything you want to on this, Steve, is that the look of the film doesn't appear dated. And I think the reason for that is that even though it's a 1970s film, it's a period piece. And so I almost think that if we got a full HD, super high resolution, super clean version of this film now, it wouldn't look as good as what we got in the 1970s. You know, it feels more realistic. What do you think about that?
I think that that's fair, and I think partly it's because honestly, the Victorian era was a pretty grimy place. I mean, there was a lot of soot, there was a lot of chimney dust and things like that. There were people getting their lungs blackened with coal and whatnot. So yeah, that was a part of life back then. So it should look grimy. And I think if you try to clean it up with modern technology, it's not going to look as good. And honestly, if you a fair comparison would be to try to compare other versions of the Victorian era, with that have been done with HD or with CG. I would say like there's an episode of Good Omens, which is set throughout history, and there's a
Yeah.
definite and there's a scene between David Tennant and Michael Sheen that is set in the Victorian era. And if you kind of compare those two, it's done very differently. They both work, but it's like one works for a few years ago and one works for 1970 some.
Yeah.
And so I think that for what they had with the technology they had, it comes out well. But it's like you kind of have to keep in mind that it works better because of those imperfections. And a lot of times, you really don't want to clean up too much, because then you kind of take away from the character of the location and the setting and the costumes and all of that. And I think that's the case here.
And I will also say at the same time, there are many times in the film where it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, they catch some very beautiful shots, or when they're in high society and different things, that translates very well as well. So I think it is a great film to watch and look at. I think it's great as a period piece. I think what Steve says is fair. I mean, I think they could do it now. It would just have a different look and feel to it. But even then, I think they could replicate it. My wife is really into Downton Abbey right now, which is later than this film, but it still has that feel and look to it, very similar to what you get here. So
Yeah. Or the Nevers.
yeah,
Say what you want about Joss Whedon, the look of the Victorian era in that show was quite well executed.
absolutely, absolutely. So awesome. All right, so I'm going to take us out of here, but before I do, I want to thank my co-host so much for being here with me. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, it was really good. I'm kind of glad I finally watched this. This was always one of those movies. It's like, yeah, it looks cool. I would like to finally see it, but there was never really like a great opportunity to watch it. And it's been fun discussing it. And honestly, I ended up loving Pierce. He started to become one of
Yeah.
my more beloved movie villains.
Yeah, he's the villain you'd love to hate. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this movie to you all as well. Go check it out. If you're a fan of Sherlock Holmes, like the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes by Granada Television, you will love the look and feel of this movie because it feels very similar. They could be placed in the same universe for sure. So thank you very much, Mike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you to Bean as well. He's back there taking a nap now. So
yeah, he's getting a massage from his daddy right now.
So thank you, everyone. And next week, we will be back with another episode of Cinema Crusaders. Tune in and see what movie we're going to talk about next. Until then, keep that popcorn warm, cuddle up in a nice comfy chair and watch some films, preferably The Great Train Robbery. And we will see you all next week on Cinema Crusaders. Thank you, everybody. Bye.